I heard the following story a few years ago. A new monk arrives at the monastery. He is assigned to help the other monks in copying the older texts by hand. He notices, however, that they are copying copies and not the original books. So the new monk goes to the head monk to ask him about this. He points out that if there was an error in the first copy, that error would be continued in all the other copies. The head monk says, "We have been copying from the copies for centuries, but you make a good point, my son." So the head monk goes down into the cellar with one of the copies to check it against the original. Hours later, nobody has seen him. So one of the other monks, goes downstairs to look for him. He hears sobbing coming from the back of the cellar, and he finds the old monk leaning over one of the original books, crying. The other monk asks, "What's wrong?" The word is celebrate, not celibate. Says the old monk with tears in his eyes. I tell this story because we who are part of a liberal faith like Unitarian Universalism are not unquestioningly bound to tradition. What is more, I believe we are called not only to question traditional practices, we are also called to explore and even expand the use of traditional religious language. We do this because we have a proud heritage of women and men who were not satisfied with the status quo, who demanded more of religion than dogma and creed. And because as human beings, we wanted and still want an authentic experience of everything that life has to offer us. One of the words I've enjoyed exploring is transcendence. I like the Merriam-Webster dictionary or simple definition of transcendence. It is beyond the limits of ordinary experience. This morning I would like to explore transcendence in three ways: through our experiences of the physical world, through our ideals and how we treat one another, and in our sense of belonging to the world around us. In Genesis 6 through 9 of the Hebrew Bible, we find the story of Noah and the flood. As the story goes, God is so distraught with the wickedness of humanity that God destroys all of the animals and people He had created, except for Noah and his family and a pair of each kind of animal, male and female. God succeeds in this destruction, and at the end of the story, promises never to do it again. As a sign of God's promise, the rainbow is cast into the sky. A God who is distraught, a God who, after destroying humankind, has second thoughts. These are in themselves ample sermon fodder. But today, my interest is in the rainbow. The story of the rainbow has played a crucial role in my understanding of religion. Religion, as I have come to understand it, is our search for truth and order and meaning in life and in death. It is our effort to make sense of the world around us, to understand our relationship with and place in the world, and to find some assurance and hope that life is not as menacing as it sometimes appears. In a pre-scientific world, the story of God's promise through the rainbow touched on each of these. The supernatural has long been a placeholder for things we do not understand. It has been a way to fill in the gaps of our knowledge or to explain our customs, and it has afforded us a way to understand some of the most intimate and profound experiences of life. Today we have scientific explanations for many of the things we once didn't understand. And while we have these rational explanations, my hope is they do not diminish in any way our sense of awe and wonder, beauty and joy. It is my hope that we are genuinely mesmerized by the natural world that surrounds us. The pictures I showed in the story For All Ages reveals the seasons in all their beauty and splendor. And there is no truer testament than the awe captured on the faces of those children. The meditation I read by Robert Weston stirs me when I think that out of the stars life and love emerged, as well as singing. Whether it is the rainbow in the sky, a sunrise or a sunset, the stars above, or the inner workings of the human body, we are rightly held in awe of these natural phenomena, these wonders of nature. And yes, there are many things we still do not understand, and our sense of wonder will carry us forward. There is another extraordinary human experience that has captured my attention. As human beings evolved, we developed ideas of right and wrong. This was a phenomenal evolutionary development. Our religious ancestors, at least in the Judeo-Christian tradition, wrote stories to explain how God revealed the moral and ethical mores of our society. While we can still revere these ancient texts because they do contain wisdom beyond measure, it is through critical studies that we now realize that casting these moral and ethical laws in the context of stories was a means of codifying the moral teachings of a culture. This does not detract from them. If anything, I am in awe that human culture developed these immensely important guides that teach us how we can survive together as a community, as a culture, as a society. Companions to these moral codes of right and wrong, I believe there are equally significant values and ideals that offer us not just a way to survive, but a way to thrive in our common humanity. I'm speaking about teachings that also have ancient roots that help us understand how we are to treat one another. There are many examples in both Jewish and Christian scriptures, but the ones that touch me most deeply are love and forgiveness, kindness and mercy. And from Eastern religions, I am deeply moved by the ideals that peace begins in the heart and that generosity begins with freedom from desire. These are ideals that we will spend a lifetime trying to live up to. Our own Unitarian Universalist faith follows in these traditions. When we speak about the inherent worth and dignity of every person, no exceptions. This is our first UU principle. We are clearly in step with ancient teachings that speak to our better natures. I maintain that these are transcendent values. I call them transcendent because they represent ideals, states of perfection that we can imagine, that we can strive for, but that we can only partially achieve, because we will never completely be able to embody them, because we are human beings. A few years ago, I gave a sermon in which I said that I believe that we in liberal religion have moved from the reverence of transcendent beings to a deep yearning to live by transcendent values. These values and ideals that call to us hold before us a way of being in the world that is beyond our grasp in their perfection, and yet appeal to our spiritual natures and inspires us in profound ways. I call these values and ideals transcendent because we will never be able to live them perfectly. And yet there is nothing more compelling, nothing more humbling, nothing more magnificent than striving for these ideals, being willing to fail, to humbly acknowledge our humanity, to dust ourselves off and try again. I can think of nothing more poignant in the religious search for truth and meaning. Finally, I want to speak about one other kind of transcendent experience. As human beings, we have a deep sense of belonging and connection to life. Perhaps this begins with our animal natures, from our need for security and that we are social by nature. And yet I have the sense that there is much more than that. I think our presence here this morning speaks to our desire to belong to something larger than ourselves, and our presence yesterday about our desire to make the world better. That we are seeking connection and purpose in life. And as Unitarian Universalists, we affirm the oneness of life. We see this in the affirmation of our seventh principle, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. It speaks to the vital role of our shared interdependence in this life. When speaking of belonging, connection, and oneness, I include here what we traditionally call mystical experiences. These are peak experiences of belonging and feeling a oneness with the universe, with a reality that defies description. Do these mystical experiences come from the natural world? Because they are very unique and very personal experiences, I think that question must be answered by each individual. But what I do offer, and I think this perhaps reveals my bias, is that there are deep recesses of the natural world that we barely understand and may never understand. When I speak of a sense of belonging or purpose, I include here my own sense of ministerial calling. And I don't believe there is anything unique about a ministerial calling, because a calling comes in all shapes and sizes, all colors, all textures. What these callings have in common is a strong sense of purpose. And if I choose to, I could say that they feel otherworldly. It feels as though I am being drawn from something outside myself. And yet it also feels very natural, intense but natural. A peak experience of the world in which of which I am a part. It feels bound together with a sense of awe, of reverence, of joy, of gratitude, and a deep connection with life. Of course, all this brings to mind our very own transcendentalist movement of the early and mid-19th century, led by Ralph Waldo Emerson, a Unitarian minister for a brief time. He was greatly criticized by many Unitarians in his day, and I have to believe that he was light years ahead of the mainstream or orthodox Unitarians of his time. Emerson wrote of God and miracles, but not as traditionally understood, even by the Unitarians of his day. He wrote not of the God in the Bible, but the God found in nature and the God found within each person. He wrote of miracles, but not those performed by Jesus. He wrote of the miracle of the birth of a child. When speaking of natural transcendence, there is still room for God, but it is God of the natural world. For most of human history, the realm of God, miracle, awe, mystery, and wonder, our biggest and best words, have been reserved for another realm, the realm of the supernatural. As Unitarian Universalists, though, I believe we are part of a transformation, if not a revolution, in the way we think about and talk about our experiences of life. As I hope you can appreciate, I was very motivated to write this sermon on the first day of spring. Whether it is the awe-inspiring bursting forth of new life, or the deep feelings of connection inspired by this season and all seasons of the year, each of these connections is very much with the natural world. May we continue to find joy, gratitude, awe, beauty, wonder, mystery, belonging, purpose, and oneness in this life that calls to our hearts and calls us into new ways of being and new ways of being together. May it be so.